I never imagined I would write something like this. I had always been a skeptical, down-to-earth person, living an ordinary and predictable life. My name is Jessica. I'm 34 years old, and until that day, my routine was like anyone else's. I woke up early, braved the traffic to get to the accounting office where I work, spent hours dealing with numbers, and came home exhausted. Nothing had ever prepared me for what happened that morning. I was driving to work, listening to the radio, when I felt a strange dizziness. My heart raced for no reason, my hands became sweaty, and suddenly darkness took over my vision. Before I could understand what was happening, I heard the sound of tires skidding on the asphalt and a distant horn, and then everything went black. Suddenly, I was no longer there. It was as if my body had been left behind, and I had been pulled out of it. I saw everything from above, as if I were floating in the air, watching the accident unfold in slow motion. My car spun out of control, crossing lanes, while other drivers braked abruptly to avoid a collision. And there I was, or rather my body, slumped over the steering wheel, motionless. The strangest part was that, despite the gravity of the situation, I wasn't afraid. There was no pain, no panic. Instead, an indescribable peace took over me. I felt that I no longer needed to worry about anything, that everything was okay in a way it had never been before. It was at that moment that the truth hit me. I was dying. I floated there for a time I can't measure. Maybe it was seconds, maybe minutes, but to me it seemed to exist outside of time. It was strange to see my own body there, so fragile, as if it were just an object, something that no longer belonged to me. And then something began to happen. I was overcome by an even greater sensation of lightness, as if an invisible current were pulling me upward. I didn't fight it. In fact, there was no reason to fight. I simply let myself be carried along. Gradually, the world I knew became distant. The noise of traffic, the distant sirens, everything began to dissolve into a profound and welcoming silence. And it was in that instant that I noticed a presence around me. It wasn't a physical presence, but I knew I wasn't alone. It was as if something or someone were there with me, guiding me to a place I still didn't understand. Then I saw the tunnel. It was immense, but not in a way that could be measured in meters or kilometers. It was more like a portal that expanded beyond my comprehension. An intense light shone at the end, but it wasn't just any light. It didn't hurt the eyes, it didn't blind, yet at the same time it seemed to illuminate every part of me, as if it could penetrate my very essence. And that light was calling me. I knew I had to go there, that was the way. I began to be drawn toward it, as if I were gliding smoothly toward that absolute brilliance. And as I approached, a new feeling took over me, a love so deep, so complete, that it made me realize how small and limited the physical world truly was. Everything I knew, the fear, the pain, the worries, was left behind, dissolving in the presence of that light. I felt that I was about to cross a threshold, to enter a place where nothing could hurt or trap me. Yet deep down, a part of me still knew that I didn't completely belong in that place. Not yet. As I got closer to that light, I began to notice something strange, or rather, something deeply familiar. It was as if all the answers I never knew I was looking for were there, waiting for me. It wasn't just a physical clarity, it was a consciousness, a living presence that enveloped me. I couldn't see a face, but I felt that it knew me in a way no one ever had. Every fear, every doubt, every mistake I had ever made seemed insignificant in the face of that overwhelming energy. And then, as if I were being prepared to cross over to that other side once and for all, I felt a surge of memories pass through me. They weren't just memories of my life, but something greater. It was as if my own spirit were awakening to a truth much older than myself. That's when everything changed. Before I could fully cross over, something made me stop. It was a presence, It appeared before me immense, brilliant, and overwhelmingly powerful. I knew exactly who it was, yet I still couldn't fully comprehend what I was seeing. Jesus. But it wasn't the image I knew from paintings and movies. He didn't look like the white man with long hair I grew up seeing in churches. His skin was dark like polished bronze, his eyes like living flames, radiating something beyond words. His gaze pierced my soul, and for the first time since leaving my body, I felt something close to human emotion, absolute awe. I wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but words didn't exist there. They weren't needed. He already knew everything. Jesus didn't need to say anything for me to understand that he was there for me. His mere presence was enough to make me feel exposed, as if everything I was laid bare before him. But contrary to what I feared, there was no judgment in his eyes. There was no condemnation, no disapproval, only a pure, undeniable truth, as if he were showing me who I really was, without filters or illusions. And then, without moving his lips, without needing words, he began to show me something. It was as if my consciousness were being pulled into a timeless space where images, sounds, and feelings intertwined into a single stream of understanding. What I saw left me breathless. Before me, scenes of a distant past unfolded, a past that I had never learned about in school, that I had never seen in history books. I saw ancient civilizations filled with wisdom and spirituality, with temples erected for something far greater than anything we know today. I saw black men and women dressed in golden fabrics and crowns that seemed made of light, gathered around symbols and scriptures that pulsed with sacred knowledge. They spoke a language I didn't understand, but that somehow made sense within me. I knew that this was real. I knew that this was a forgotten piece of history, a fragment that had been taken from us. And then, like an explosion in my mind, the truth hit me. The narrative we know was manipulated. A colossal lie was imposed on the world to hide something essential. I wanted to deny what I was seeing. I wanted to tell myself it was just a hallucination, that my mind was creating it. But the truth was too strong to ignore. Jesus remained there, allowing me to absorb everything, unhurried, without interference. I saw how that ancient wisdom was systematically erased. I saw temples being burned, books destroyed, sacred symbols being replaced by distorted images. I saw entire peoples being torn from their lands, their beliefs demonized, their identity shredded, until they themselves forgot who they really were. None of this was an accident. It wasn't simply history unfolding. It was a plan to keep an entire people away from their deepest spiritual connection, so they would never again have access to the power they once possessed. I felt my heart, or whatever was left of me in that state, tighten with a weight I had never experienced before. I had always known that history is written by the victors, but I had never imagined that the level of manipulation could be so deep. The suppression of the truth was not just political or economic. It was spiritual. An invisible battle had been waged for centuries to keep humanity trapped in a carefully constructed illusion. And at the center of it all, black peoples had been the targets of one of the greatest historical erasures ever carried out. I felt Jesus' presence by my side, firm, unshakable. He wasn't telling me what to think, wasn't forcing me to accept anything. He was simply showing me. I knew I was faced with a choice: to look at all of this and pretend I hadn't seen, or to accept that my view of the world would never be the same after this. Then the vision changed. As if being transported by an invisible force, I saw centuries pass before me in a whirlwind of images. Slavery wasn't just an act of human brutality, it was a spiritual blow. I saw slave ships, I saw chains, but I also saw something beyond physical pain. I saw dark entities, formless shadows, hovering over those who had been torn from their lands. They fed on suffering, on despair, on disconnection. It was a system meticulously built to crush not only bodies, but souls. The more those men and women lost their languages, their beliefs, their rights, the more these forces grew. Colonization wasn't just a territorial invasion, it was a spiritual strategy to sever the link that existed between that people and something much greater. My own spirit shuddered as I realized what it all meant. This went beyond history, beyond the books and versions we were taught. I saw the modern world being drawn from this erasure. Slavery was officially abolished, but the system remained. The physical chains were replaced by invisible shackles. The lack of identity, the absence of belonging, the internalization of inferiority. I saw how ancestral religions were demonized, how African spirituality was distorted and associated with evil, while the real history was buried under layer upon layer of distortion. All of this to ensure that this people would never discover who they truly were. And, as all this was shown, to me, I realized what Jesus wanted me to understand. This battle never ended. It is still happening. I wanted to look away, to deny what I was seeing, but it was impossible. The truth was there, laid bare, and I felt every fragment of it imprinting itself on me. Then I realized something even more disturbing. These forces that had erased history did not act alone. I saw powerful figures, leaders, entire institutions operating like pieces on an invisible chessboard. The goal was never merely economic or territorial domination. It was always control over consciousness. Ignorance was the most effective weapon. The more people remained trapped in a distorted identity, the easier it was to manipulate them, to make them forget their true power. The media, politics, even the very social structure were shaped to keep this disconnection alive. And the few who tried to reveal this truth were silenced, discredited, or simply erased from history. The pain of this revelation was immense, yet at the same time, something within me began to awaken. I now understood why Jesus was showing me all of this. It wasn't just so I could see the injustice or feel compassion. It was so I could understand the depth of this battle. This struggle wasn't only earthly, it was spiritual. The true enemy was never the empires, the governments, or the elites. The true enemy was that which manipulated them, that which operated behind the scenes, ensuring that the truth would never be recovered. And yet, Jesus wasn't showing me this so that I would surrender to fear or revolt. There was something more, something I still didn't fully understand, but that burned inside me like an ember about to ignite into a flame. Then the vision changed once more. The past began to fade, and before me appeared something different, the present. I saw the world as it is now, but with eyes I had never had before, people living their lives unaware of the truth, distracted by everyday problems, caught in an endless cycle of survival. I saw how this spiritual disconnection was maintained through entertainment, politics, institutionalized religion. Everything worked to ensure that humanity did not look inward, that no one discovered what we truly are. But at the same time, something was happening. Small points of light began to appear amid that darkness. People were waking up, questioning, searching for something they couldn't even name, but that they felt deep in their souls. I saw it growing like a flame, a silent resistance that was only just beginning. Jesus looked at me, and in that moment, I understood what he wanted to show me. The awakening had already begun, but not without consequences. For every person who tried to see beyond the illusion, there were forces working to pull them back. I saw how the truth was distorted and ridiculed, how those who dared to speak were discredited or labeled as crazy. I saw technologies being used to manipulate the masses' perception, keeping people constantly distracted. But at the same time, I saw something even more powerful. Once awakened, the truth cannot be erased. A single spark can ignite an entire forest. The fear these forces had was not of the truth itself, but of what would happen if it spread too quickly, if many people began to remember at once. I saw that this moment was approaching, and that I was a part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. I felt an enormous weight within me. Knowing the truth is one thing, but carrying that responsibility is entirely different. It was as if Jesus was showing me that once I had seen all of this, I could not simply go back to my normal life and pretend nothing had happened. But fear began to grow within me. How could I alone make any difference? How could I speak of this without being ridiculed, without being discredited? Who would believe me? I wasn't an academic. I wasn't a leader. I had no influence. I was just an ordinary woman who, until a few hours ago, was driving to work, stuck in her predictable routine. But Jesus knew what I was thinking. He looked at me and, without the need for words, I understood. I wasn't alone. I never had been. Then I saw something even more impressive. The awakening didn't depend on one single person, but on many. I saw others like me, people around the world receiving the same messages, experiencing the same callings, each in their own way. Some through dreams, others through near-death experiences like mine, others simply feeling an inexplicable desire to seek something more. I realized I wasn't an exception, but part of a greater movement, something that was happening because the time for this truth to be known had come. But along with that, I also saw resistance. Shadows were moving, trying to prevent this awakening, trying to discredit those who spoke, trying to make everything seem like nothing more than conspiracy, madness, or fantasy. And in that moment, I understood that this was not an ordinary battle. It was a spiritual war, and all of us in some way were already a part of it. Suddenly, I felt as if I were being pulled back. The light around me began to distort, and the feeling of absolute peace gave way to something denser, heavier. It was as if I were being ripped from that space and thrown back into reality. My instinct was to fight it, to remain there, to continue learning, to keep seeing. But then, for the first time, Jesus spoke to me. His voice wasn't like human voices. It wasn't a sound vibrating in the air. It was something that echoed within me, filling every part of my being. You need to go back. Those 3 words carried immense weight, and I knew in that instant that my journey there had ended. There were still things I needed to do in the physical world. There were still truths to be told, people to be awakened. I couldn't stay. And then everything disappeared. In the blink of an eye, I felt a strong impact, as if I had fallen from a great height, and then a piercing pain shot through my chest. Air violently filled my lungs, and with a jolt, my eyes opened. I was back. The sunlight was hitting the car's windshield, and voices around me were shouting, calling my name. I could barely move, but I was alive. People were around me, paramedics attending to me, someone holding my hand. The noise of the world seemed distant, muffled, as if I still wasn't completely here. But I knew that everything I had experienced was real. And I knew, above all, that nothing would ever be the same again. The following days were a blur of hospitals, tests, and questions I didn't know how to answer. The doctors were astonished. They said I had a sudden episode of severe arrhythmia, something that could have been fatal. But somehow my heart started beating on its own before the worst happened. They ran every test possible, but found no concrete explanation for what occurred. To them, it was just a near accident, something that could have ended tragically. But luckily it did not. But I knew it wasn't just that. I died. I saw the other side. I spoke with Jesus. And now I carried a truth that I didn't know how to share with anyone. How do you explain something like this? How do you put into words an experience that transcends everything we know? I tried to convince myself that maybe it would be better to forget, to go on with my life as if nothing had happened. But that was impossible. The images remained vivid in my mind, the voices, the revelations. Everything pulsed inside me like an electric current impossible to ignore. I spent sleepless nights reliving every detail, feeling as if I carried a burden I didn't know how to bear. I thought about telling a few close people, but just imagining their reaction made me hesitate. How do you explain to someone that the history of the world we know is a lie, that something has been hidden from us for centuries, that invisible forces are working to keep everything as it is? It was too big, too profound. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't keep it to myself forever. Sooner or later, I would have to speak. The first time I tried to talk about it was with my sister. I waited for the right moment, tried to choose my words carefully. But the moment I began to explain, I saw her expression change. At first, she listened with curiosity, but as I went into the details, the tunnel of light, Jesus, the visions of hidden history, she crossed her arms and gave me that look I knew so well. The look of someone who no longer believes. Jess, you went through a trauma. Your brain might have created these images to cope with a near-death experience. I tried to insist, to explain that it wasn't a hallucination, that I truly felt it, that it was real. But she only sighed and changed the subject. My heart sank. If not even my own sister believed me, how could I expect anyone else to? But the worst was yet to come. I began to try writing about the experience, to jot everything down before. The details faded, and that was when strange things started to happen. My computer would shut off by itself when I tried to save the file. When I finally managed to finish a text and sent it to a trusted friend, the email never arrived. My videos gave errors when uploaded. Social media started acting strangely, posts disappearing, messages that I was sure I had sent simply vanishing. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, technical glitches, but then one night I woke up with a horrible feeling that I wasn't alone in the room. The air was heavy, almost suffocating. When I tried to move, I realized I couldn't. Something was there with me, something that didn't want me to speak. Fear took over me like never before. My body was paralyzed, my breathing shallow, and the only thing I could do was stare around the room with wide eyes. The darkness seemed denser, more alive, and then I saw it. In the corner of the room, a shadow was moving, not like a person, but like something that shouldn't exist. It had no defined shape, just a formless, dense, almost pulsating silhouette. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt it was watching me. And the worst part was what I felt inside. A dread that went beyond the physical, a terror that struck my soul. That wasn't just a presence. It was something ancient, something that knew exactly who I was and what I had seen. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't just a human challenge. It was a spiritual war, as Jesus had shown me. And I was being attacked for daring to see the truth. But then, in the midst of despair, something inside me reacted. The memory of the light, of the peace I felt beside Jesus, exploded in my mind. With all the strength I had left, I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. So within me, I screamed with everything I had, Jesus! At that very moment, the shadow recoiled as if struck by something invisible. An indescribable force swept through the room, and suddenly I was able to breathe again. My body started moving once more, and when I blinked, the shadow had vanished. But the message was clear. I was being watched. And if I insisted on telling this truth, they would try to stop me again. After that night, everything changed. I knew I could no longer ignore what was happening, but I also knew that by trying to expose this truth, I would face obstacles far beyond people's skepticism. I wasn't just dealing with human resistance. I was dealing with something much greater. I spent days, unable to sleep properly, always with that feeling of being observed. Small things began to happen more frequently. Lights flickering for no reason, electronics shutting off by themselves, inexplicable noises around the house. At first, I tried to rationalize, telling myself it was just paranoia, but deep down I knew it was an attempt to scare me, to silence me. Yet, at the same time, something within me began to grow. I didn't want to be dominated by fear. I remembered what Jesus showed. Me, the people awakening, the small lights shining amid the darkness. If I backed down now, I would be doing exactly what those forces wanted. So for the first time, I made a conscious decision. I would speak. I would tell what I saw, regardless of the consequences. I opened a new document on my computer, took a deep breath and began to write. I wrote about my near-death experience, about what I saw, about the revelation I received. This time, there was no glitch, no error, as if something inside me was stronger, more protected. I knew I would still face challenges, that they would try to stop me again. But I had no doubt anymore. This truth needed to be known. When I published my account for the first time, the response was exactly as I expected. Some people supported me, saying they got chills reading it, that something inside them resonated with it. But most reacted with disbelief. I received mocking comments, messages saying I was delusional, that it was nothing more than a dream or an illusion caused by my brain in a state of trauma. Some tried to explain it scientifically, talking about neurological effects during a near-death experience. Others simply laughed and said I was seeking attention. And yet, something strange happened. Among the skeptical messages, some people began to contact me privately. People who had had similar experiences, who also felt that truth, but who were afraid to speak about it. Gradually, I realized I wasn't as alone as I had imagined. But with that came even more intense attacks, not just from people, but from something beyond. The dreams began. I would wake up in the middle of the night with the sensation of being pulled out of my body, as if something were trying to tear me from my very existence. I saw faces in the dark, heard whispers when I was alone. Even my health began to be affected, extreme fatigue, unexplained pains. But I refused to stop. Every time I felt those forces trying to silence me, something inside me grew. Even stronger, I began to pray every night, to call for Jesus whenever I sensed that presence around me. And each time I did, the fear diminished. I was learning that this struggle wasn't mine alone. I didn't have to face it by myself. Then I had another vision. It wasn't like the near-death experience, but something different, subtler, as if my consciousness had been pulled into another space while I slept. At first, I saw only darkness, but then images began to appear before me. I saw the world as it is today, but something was changing. People were beginning to question everything, the history, spirituality, the very structure of society. I saw a movement growing, a mass awakening happening, and with it, brutal resistance. The world was on the brink of something huge, something no one could name, but that everyone in some way felt. I saw chaos. I saw manipulation. I saw desperate attempts to keep people distracted. But I also saw light. I saw those who were awakening, uniting, growing stronger, finding ways to resist. And then one last thing was shown to me. I saw that this battle would not be won with violence, nor with revolt. The most powerful weapon was the truth. I saw that the only way to win was to remember who we are, to remember what was taken from us, to remember that we were never alone. Jesus was there, as he had been from the beginning, and his words echoed within me. Truth always finds a way. When I woke up, my heart was racing, but I wasn't afraid. For the first time since the accident, I felt clarity. I knew I would still face difficulties, that they would still try to silence me, but now I understood something essential. The truth doesn't need everyone to believe in it immediately. It just needs to be spoken, because once spoken, it can never be erased. From that day on, something inside me changed. I stopped trying to convince people, stopped worrying about who believed in my experience or not. I realized that the truth didn't need to be defended. It only needed to be shared. I began to speak more openly, not to impose anything, but to plant seeds. And to my surprise, some people began to listen. I received messages from strangers who said they felt something different when reading my account, as if a forgotten memory were trying to emerge. Others shared that they had gone through similar experiences, but never had the courage to talk about it. Gradually, I saw that this truth was spreading, not as an explosion, but like a flame passing from candle to candle. But with that, the attacks continued as well. Disturbing dreams, people trying to discredit me, even moments when my health seemed to collapse for no reason. But now I knew I couldn't give up. It wasn't about me, it never was. Jesus showed me what needed to be seen, but the choice to keep speaking was mine. I knew the path wouldn't be easy, but every time I felt fear, I remembered what he told me. Truth always finds a way. And then I took a deep breath, closed my eyes and carried on, because deep down, I already knew that this battle wouldn't end with me. It was just beginning. Over the following months, I learned to recognize the signs of this invisible battle. I saw how some people were guided to the truth almost instinctively, as if something within them were awakening on its own. But I also saw the other side: fear, resistance, denial. Some people simply weren't ready to see. And now I understood that this was part of the process. It wasn't my place to force anyone to believe. My role was simply to share, to keep speaking, to keep lighting small fires wherever I could. And I realized that I was no longer alone. Gradually, I found other people who had also been touched by something greater, who were also trying to understand their own experiences. That gave me strength. I was no longer just Jessica, a woman who had a strange experience and was labeled crazy. I was part of something much greater than I had ever imagined. But this journey also taught me something else. The truth demands a price. It isn't always acceptance, it isn't always understanding. Sometimes it is loneliness. Sometimes it is carrying a weight that few understand. But deep down, I knew there was no other way for me. I could pretend nothing happened. I could try to go back to my normal life, but that would never work. After seeing what I saw, after feeling Jesus' presence, after understanding what was at stake, there was no turning back. I was no longer the same person who got into the car that morning, thinking it would be just another ordinary day. I had been transformed, and now I had a mission, even if I didn't always know exactly how to fulfill it. Then, one day, I realized something that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't need to know exactly what to do. I didn't need to have all the answers or understand every detail of this battle. The simple fact of continuing, of not falling silent, of holding firm despite the fears and difficulties was already part of the mission. Truth doesn't demand grand feats, only the courage to be spoken. And that's what I began to do. Whenever I felt doubts, whenever fear tried to overtake me, I remembered that moment in Jesus' presence. I remembered his gaze, the light around him, the absolute certainty that I had never been alone. And then I took a deep breath and carried on. I know many will not believe me. I know some will laugh, others will ignore, and many won't even let this idea pass through their minds. But if even one person feels that it awakens something within them, then it will have been worth it. I don't tell this story to convince anyone. I tell it because I need to, because I know that this truth carries a weight that cannot be borne in silence. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what else I will face for following this path. But I do know one thing. I will never be the same again. And now that I have seen the truth, I can never shut it out again. I know that some people will read this and simply move on, as if it were just another story on the internet. But for those who feel something different, who feel a calling within themselves, I need to say, you are not alone. Something is happening, something that goes beyond what we can comprehend with our limited senses. There is a truth that has been hidden, but that is beginning to emerge. And if you felt that truth resonate within you, then perhaps you are already awake, or about to awaken. This struggle isn't about one single person. It isn't about me or any other individual. It's about all of us, about remembering who we truly are, about reclaiming what was taken from us. And to those who try to silence me, who try to make this message disappear. I'm not afraid. I know I will still face challenges. I know the battle continues. But I also know that light always conquers darkness. I saw, I felt, and nothing in the world can erase that from me. So I keep going, even though sometimes it's hard, even though the path is lonely, because this truth does not belong to me, it belongs to the world. And now that it has begun to be spoken, no one can stop it.